The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as Private Sarah Mitchell adjusted her ceremonial uniform for the third time. Her hands trembled slightly as she straightened the golden braids on her red jacket. Today marked her first day as a member of the Queen's Guard, a position she had dreamed of since childhood. Sarah had fought tooth and nail to earn this role. The training had been brutal, lasting 18 months of physical conditioning, weapons training, and protocol memorization. Out of 200 candidates, only 12 had made it through. She was the only woman in her class, facing constant doubt from instructors, who questioned whether she belonged among the elite guards. The palace buzzed with activity as tourists gathered behind the iron gates, cameras ready to capture the famous changing of the guard ceremony. Sarah took her position beside the palace entrance, her rifle held at attention. The weight of the weapon felt familiar after months of training, but the weight of expectation felt much heavier. Captain Reynolds, stern man with 30 years of service, approached with his usual scowl. He had made no secret of his disapproval when Sarah was assigned to his unit. His weathered face showed years of military discipline, and his eyes held the kind of authority that came from commanding respect on battlefields around the world. "Mitchell," he barked, stopping directly in front of her. "I want to make something clear. This isn't some publicity stunt. The Queen's safety depends on every guard being capable of handling real threats. I don't care what the newspapers say about progress and equality. If you can't do the job, you're out." Sarah met his gaze steadily, her chin raised with quiet determination. "I understand, sir. I'm ready to prove myself." Captain Reynolds snorted dismissively. "We'll see about that. Your first test starts now. You'll be stationed at the main gate during the morning shift. Try not to embarrass the regiment." As the captain walked away, Sarah felt the stares of her fellow guards. Some looked curious, others skeptical. A few seemed sympathetic, but none offered words of encouragement. She was truly on her own in this traditional male domain. The morning progressed without incident as tourists took photos and children waved at the stoic guards. Sarah maintained perfect posture despite the growing ache in her legs. The ceremonial uniform, while impressive, wasn't designed for comfort during long periods of standing motionless. Around midday, commotion erupted near the palace gates. A group of protesters had arrived, shouting about government policies and waving signs. Their voices grew louder and more aggressive as palace security tried to maintain order. Sarah watched from her post as the situation escalated, her training kicking in as she assessed potential threats. The crowd pressed against the barriers, and Sarah noticed a man in a dark jacket behaving suspiciously. Unlike the other protesters who were focused on their cause, this individual kept glancing around nervously and reaching into his jacket. Her instincts, honed through months of security training, told her something wasn't right. Captain Reynolds appeared beside her, his face tense as he surveyed the growing chaos. "Stay at your post, Mitchell. This is a job for experienced personnel." But Sarah's attention remained fixed on the suspicious man. As the crowd surged forward, she saw him pull something metallic from his jacket. The glint of metal caught the sunlight for just a split second, but it was enough. Her heart raced as she realized what she was seeing. "Sir," she said urgently, "the man in the dark jacket, third row back. He's armed." Captain Reynolds followed her gaze, but couldn't immediately spot the threat among the dozens of people. "I don't see anything. Don't let your nerves get the better of you." Sarah's training took over. She had been taught to trust her instincts and act decisively when lives were at stake. The man was moving closer to the palace gates, his hand still concealed in his jacket. Every second of hesitation could mean disaster. "Sir, I'm certain. He has a weapon, and he's moving toward the entrance." The captain's expression hardened. "Return to your post, private. That's an order." As Sarah struggled with the conflict between following orders and protecting the palace, the suspicious man made his move. The crowd provided perfect cover as he slipped past the main security checkpoint, heading directly for the palace entrance where Sarah stood guard. The moment of truth had arrived, and she would have to choose between obedience and duty. The suspicious man broke away from the crowd with sudden speed, his hand emerging from his jacket gripping a knife. Sarah's training kicked in immediately. Without hesitation, she stepped forward and shouted the standard warning, "Stop." Identify yourself." The man ignored her command and continued advancing toward the palace entrance. His eyes were wild with determination, and Sarah could see he had no intention of stopping. The tourists nearby began to panic as they realized something was wrong. Captain Reynolds spun around at Sarah's shout, finally spotting the armed intruder. His face went pale as he saw the knife gleaming in the man's hand. The captain reached for his radio to call for backup, but the situation was unfolding too quickly. Sarah moved with precision born from countless hours of training. She stepped into the man's path, her rifle raised and ready. Her voice carried across the courtyard with authority that surprised even herself. "Drop your weapon immediately or I will use force." The intruder hesitated for a moment, perhaps not expecting such firm resistance from the young female guard. That moment of uncertainty was all Sarah needed. She advanced with textbook tactics, keeping her weapon trained on the threat while positioning herself to protect the palace entrance. "Get back!" the man screamed, waving his knife wildly. "I have demands. The queen needs to hear what I have to say." Sarah maintained her professional composure despite her heart pounding. "Sir, drop the weapon and lie face down on the ground. This is your final warning." Captain Reynolds finally reached for his sidearm, but he was several yards away, and the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The man suddenly lunged forward, attempting to rush past Sarah toward the palace doors. Sarah reacted with lightning speed. Using a defensive maneuver she had practiced hundreds of times, she swept the man's legs while simultaneously using the butt of her rifle to knock the knife from his hand. The intruder crashed to the ground, stunned by the swift and efficient takedown, before he could recover. Sarah had her rifle trained on him while calling out, "Suspect down." Weapons secured. Other guards finally arrived on scene, along with palace security personnel. They quickly surrounded the subdued intruder as Sarah maintained her professional stance, keeping her weapon ready in case of further threats. Captain Reynolds approached with a mixture of shock and grudging respect on his face. He had witnessed the entire encounter and couldn't deny what he had seen. Sarah had identified the threat when he had missed it, acted decisively when action was needed, and neutralized the danger with textbook precision. "Excellent work, Mitchell," he said quietly, though his tone suggested the words came with difficulty. "Your quick thinking may have prevented a serious incident." As palace security took the intruder into custody, Sarah finally allowed herself to breathe normally. The adrenaline was still coursing through her system, but she felt a sense of accomplishment. She had proven herself in the most important way possible by doing her job when it mattered most. The tourists who had witnessed the incident were buzzing with excitement, many having captured the dramatic takedown on their phones. News crews began arriving within minutes, alerted by social media posts about the incident at the palace. However, Sarah's moment of triumph was short-lived. As she was giving her initial report to palace security, 2 Metropolitan Police officers approached with handcuffs. "Sarah Mitchell," one of them asked, consulting his notepad. "Yes, that's correct. You're under arrest for assault and excessive use of force against a civilian. You have the right to remain silent." Sarah stared in disbelief as the cold metal handcuffs clicked around her wrists. Around her, fellow guards watched in stunned silence. Captain Reynolds stepped forward, his face red with anger. "This is absolutely ridiculous. Private Mitchell just prevented a potential attack on the palace. That man was armed and dangerous." The police officer remained unmoved. "We're just following procedure, sir. Complaints were filed about the guard's actions. She'll have her chance to explain at the station." As Sarah was led away in handcuffs, she caught sight of the intruder being helped into an ambulance. He was conscious and appeared to have only minor injuries from his fall. Through the ambulance window, she could see him talking to a well-dressed man in an expensive suit, clearly a lawyer. The crowd of tourists watched in shock as the guard who had just protected them was arrested. Camera phones captured every moment as Sarah maintained her dignity despite the humiliation. Her fellow guards stood helplessly, knowing they couldn't interfere with a police arrest. Captain Reynolds followed the police car with his eyes, his jaw clenched in frustration. He had just witnessed one of his guards perform exactly as trained, only to see her arrested for doing her duty. Something about this situation felt very wrong, and he intended to find out what was really going on. At the police station, Sarah sat in a cold interrogation room, still wearing her ceremonial guard uniform minus the weapons and equipment that had been confiscated. The handcuffs had been removed, but she felt more trapped than ever. Across from her sat Detective Inspector Williams, a tired-looking man with skeptical eyes. "Let me understand this correctly," Williams said, flipping through his notes. "You attacked an unarmed civilian who was simply exercising his right to protest near the palace?" Sarah's jaw tightened. "That's not what happened. The man was armed with a knife and was attempting to breach palace security. I neutralized the threat using appropriate force, according to witnesses. You assaulted a peaceful protester without provocation. Mr. Hartwell claims he was simply trying to deliver a petition to the Queen when you attacked him unprovoked." "Hartwell?" Sarah asked. "Is that the intruder's name?" Williams nodded. "Marcus Hartwell. He's a respected activist who has organized several peaceful demonstrations. His lawyer is quite concerned about the excessive force used against his client." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't adding up. She had clearly seen the knife, witnessed the man's aggressive behavior, and followed proper protocols. Yet somehow, the narrative was being twisted to make her appear as the aggressor. "Detective, I need you to check the security footage from the palace. It will clearly show Mr. Hartwell was armed and posed a genuine threat." Williams made a note, but didn't seem particularly interested. "We'll review all available evidence, of course. But understand that attacking civilians, even in your capacity as a guard, is a serious matter. The palace guard doesn't have the same legal protections as regular police officers." Meanwhile, back at the palace, Captain Reynolds was pacing in his office like a caged lion. He had spent the last 3 hours making phone calls, trying to understand how one of his guards could be arrested for doing her job correctly. The more he investigated, the more suspicious the whole situation became. His phone rang, and he grabbed it immediately. "Reynolds here, Captain. This is Colonel James Harrison. I understand you have a situation with one of your guards." Reynolds straightened instinctively. Colonel Harrison was a legend in military circles, a decorated officer who had served in multiple conflicts and was now attached to palace security at the highest levels. When the colonel spoke, people listened. "Yes, sir." "Private Mitchell was arrested for neutralizing an armed intruder. The whole thing stinks to high heaven." "I'm reviewing the security footage now," Harrison said, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "I also ran a background check on this Marcus Hartwell character. Interesting results?" Reynolds gripped the phone tighter. "What did you find, sir?" "Hartwell isn't the peaceful activist he claims to be. He has connections to several radical groups and a history of violent confrontations, though most charges were mysteriously dropped. Someone with considerable influence has been protecting him." Pieces began falling into place in Reynolds' mind. "You think this was planned?" "I think your Private Mitchell stumbled into something much bigger than a simple protest. Someone wanted to test palace security, and they didn't expect to encounter a guard who was actually paying attention." At that moment, Detective Inspector Williams was receiving a very different kind of phone call. He had just finished his interview with Sarah when his superior, Chief Inspector Morrison, summoned him urgently. "Williams, what's the status on that palace guard arrest?" "Just finished the interview, sir. The suspect maintains she was defending the palace, but the evidence suggests excessive force against a peaceful protester." Morrison's face was grim. "We just received a call from the highest levels. This case is being reviewed by military authorities. Colonel Harrison will be taking over the investigation." Williams frowned. "Sir, this is a civilian matter. The guard assaulted a citizen on public property. Not anymore, it isn't. Apparently, this incident touches on national security issues we weren't aware of. The guard is being transferred to military custody immediately." Back in the interrogation room, Sarah heard footsteps in the corridor. The door opened to reveal a tall, distinguished man in military uniform with the insignia of a colonel. His bearing was that of a career soldier, someone who had seen action in real conflicts. Behind him stood Captain Reynolds, looking relieved. "Private Mitchell," the colonel said, his voice carrying natural authority. "I'm Colonel Harrison. I apologize for the confusion, but you're being released immediately." Sarah stood and saluted instinctively. "Sir, I was just doing my duty." Yes, you were. And you did it exceptionally well. Harrison turned to Detective Williams, who had followed them into the room. Detective, this young woman prevented what could have been a serious security breach. Your suspect, Mr. Hartwell, is known to intelligence services as a person of interest in several ongoing investigations. Williams looked confused and somewhat embarrassed. Sir, we were told he was a peaceful activist. Someone gave you incorrect information, Harrison replied coldly. The knife Private Mitchell saw was indeed real, though it seems to have disappeared during the chaos. Convenient, wouldn't you say? The implication hung heavy in the air. Sarah realized she had walked into something far more complex than a simple palace intrusion. Someone had orchestrated this entire situation, and she had been set up to take the fall. Colonel Harrison led Sarah and Captain Reynolds to a secure conference room within the palace complex. The walls were lined with monitors showing various security feeds, and the atmosphere was tense with the gravity of recent events. Sarah finally felt like she was among people who understood the real situation. Private Mitchell Harrison began, settling into a chair across from her. What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. Marcus Hartwell isn't just some random activist. He's connected to a network of individuals who have been probing palace security for months. Sarah absorbed this information, pieces of the puzzle finally starting to fit together. So the protest was deliberately planned to create chaos? Precisely. Our intelligence indicates they've been studying guard rotations, response times, and security protocols. Your quick identification of Hartwell disrupted what was likely a reconnaissance mission for a larger operation. Captain Reynolds leaned forward. His earlier skepticism of Sarah completely transformed into respect. Sir, how deep does this conspiracy go? How many people knew about the planned protest? Harrison's expression darkened. That's what we're working to determine. The fact that the police received such specific instructions to arrest Private Mitchell suggests someone within the system is feeding information to hostile actors. The colonel activated one of the wall monitors, showing security footage from the morning's incident. The crystal-clear video showed Hartwell clearly drawing a knife from his jacket and advancing toward the palace entrance. Sarah felt vindicated, watching her own professional response to the threat. As you can see, Harrison continued, Private Mitchell's actions were not only justified, but exemplary. She identified a threat that others missed and neutralized it with minimal force. This is exactly the kind of vigilance we need protecting the royal family. Sarah watched the footage with growing amazement. From this angle, she could see how Hartwell had positioned himself to avoid most security cameras until the final moments. His movements were calculated and deliberate, nothing like the random actions of a mentally disturbed individual.
Oh.
Colonel Sarah asked, what happened to the knife? Detective Williams claimed there was no weapon. An excellent question. By the time crime scene investigators arrived, the knife had vanished. However, we have testimony from 3 palace security officers who saw Hartwell drop the weapon during your takedown. Someone removed evidence from an active crime scene. Captain Reynolds stood up, pacing with barely controlled anger. This means someone in the police force is compromised. They deliberately planted false information to discredit Private Mitchell and cover up the real nature of the attack. Harrison nodded grimly. We believe so. The timing was too perfect, the story too well coordinated. Someone wanted to ensure that any guard who successfully identified this threat would be immediately discredited and removed from duty. The implications were staggering. Sarah realized she had unknowingly thwarted not just a security probe, but an attempt to compromise the entire guard system. By proving she couldn't be fooled or intimidated, she had become a threat to whatever larger plan was in motion.
Apt.
What happens now? Sarah asked. Now we turn the tables, Harrison replied with a slight smile. Mr. Hartwell thinks he's succeeded in discrediting palace security. He doesn't know we're aware of the larger conspiracy. We're going to let him and his associates believe their plan worked while we gather intelligence on their network. The colonel pulled up another screen showing surveillance photos of various individuals. These are known associates of Hartwell, who have been spotted near the palace in recent weeks. Some work in legitimate businesses, others have connections to foreign interests. We need to map their entire organization before they can launch their real attack. Sarah studied the faces on the screen, memorizing each one. "Sir, how can I help with this investigation?" Harrison exchanged glances with Captain Reynolds before responding. "Private Mitchell, your role in this operation is crucial. We want you to return to your normal duties, but now you'll be our eyes and ears. Your demonstrated ability to spot threats others miss makes you invaluable. But won't they expect me to be suspended or transferred after the arrest?" "That's the beauty of it," Reynolds interjected, understanding the plan. "The media story will be that you were cleared of all charges and returned to duty. Hartwell's people will think their frame-up attempt failed, which might cause them to make mistakes." Harrison activated another monitor, showing news coverage of the morning's events. The headlines were already spinning the story as a heroic guard stopping an attack, with no mention of the arrest or conspiracy angles. "We're controlling the narrative," Harrison explained. "As far as the public knows, you're a hero who protected the palace. As far as Hartwell knows, his plan to discredit you failed completely. This will force him to either abandon his operation or accelerate it before he's ready." Sarah felt a mix of pride and apprehension. She had joined the Queen's Guard to protect the royal family, never imagining she would become involved in counterintelligence operations. But the morning's events had proven she was capable of handling pressure and making split-second decisions that could affect national security. "There's one more thing," Harrison added, his tone becoming even more serious. "We believe Hartwell's network has infiltrated other areas of palace operations. Kitchen staff, maintenance workers, even other security personnel. You'll need to be extremely careful about who you trust." The weight of responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders. She was no longer just a guard standing ceremonial duty. She had become a key player in protecting the monarchy from a sophisticated threat that reached deep into the heart of the palace itself. 3 days after her arrest and release, Sarah returned to her guard duties with heightened awareness of everything around her. The palace felt different now that she knew threats could come from within as well as outside its walls. Every staff member, every delivery person, every routine interaction carried the possibility of danger. Colonel Harrison had equipped her with subtle communication devices and briefed her on specific signs to watch for. Her fellow guards treated her with newfound respect after her actions. But she couldn't shake the feeling that someone among them might be reporting to Hartwell's network. On her morning shift, Sarah noticed a maintenance worker she hadn't seen before. He was young, maybe mid-20s, and seemed to be paying unusual attention to security camera positions while pretending to repair lighting fixtures. Her training had taught her that real maintenance work focused on the actual problem, not the surrounding area. She discreetly activated her communication device. "Control, this is Mitchell. Possible surveillance activity in the East Corridor? Acknowledge, Mitchell. Continue observation." The maintenance worker moved through the corridor with practiced efficiency. But Sarah caught him photographing junction boxes and security panel locations with a small camera. When he noticed her watching, he quickly pocketed the device and focused intently on his supposed repair work. Sarah approached casually. "Morning. Everything working properly with the lights?" The man looked up with a nervous smile. "Just routine maintenance checks. These old fixtures need regular attention." "Funny thing," Sarah replied conversationally. "That particular fixture was just serviced yesterday by our regular maintenance team. I remember because they had to bring in a special ladder." The man's composure cracked slightly. "Must have been a different issue. Sometimes these things need multiple visits." Sarah noticed sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. "Of course. Mind if I see your work order?" "Standard security protocol. Left it in my van. I can get it if needed." "That would be helpful. Palace security requires documentation for all maintenance work in this area." The man gathered his tools hastily. "You know what? I think I need a different part for this job. I'll come back later with the proper paperwork." He left quickly, too quickly for someone doing legitimate work. Sarah immediately reported the incident and followed at a discreet distance. She watched as the man got into a van parked outside the main gates and drove off without the license plate clearly visible. Within hours, Colonel Harrison's investigation team had tracked the van to a rental company. The maintenance worker had used false identification to rent the vehicle, but security cameras at the rental location provided clear images of his face. They now had another piece of the conspiracy puzzle. That afternoon, Sarah was summoned to Harrison's office for a debriefing. The colonel looked pleased as he reviewed her report. "Excellent work, Private Mitchell. The individual you identified is Thomas Reed, a known associate of Marcus Hartwell. His appearance at the palace confirms they're conducting detailed surveillance in preparation for something bigger." "Sir, what kind of operation requires that level of intelligence gathering?" Harrison pulled up a classified file on his computer. "Based on the areas Reed was photographing, we believe they're planning to compromise the palace's internal communication systems. If they could disable or monitor our security networks during a state event, they could coordinate a much more serious attack." Sarah studied the file. Seeing connections between various suspicious incidents over the past months, the protest was never meant to succeed, was it? It was just a test to see how we would respond. Exactly. They wanted to identify our most observant guards and find ways to neutralize them. Your arrest was meant to send a message to other guards. Keep your head down or face consequences. The scope of the conspiracy was becoming clearer. This wasn't just about palace security. It was an attempt to undermine confidence in the monarchy's protection at a time when several high-profile state visits were planned. "Colonel, have you identified who in the police department was feeding information to Hartwell's network?" Harrison's expression grew grim. "We have suspicions, but proving corruption requires careful handling. Detective Inspector Williams appears to have been given false information rather than being directly involved. But someone above him orchestrated your arrest."
Ow.
Over the following days, Sarah continued her duties while serving as an intelligence asset for Colonel Harrison's investigation. She learned to read people differently, noticing subtle signs of nervousness or deception that might indicate hostile intent. Her fellow guards began seeking her advice on security matters. Recognizing that her quick thinking had prevented a serious breach, Captain Reynolds, who had initially doubted her capabilities, now relied on her observations and insights for protecting the entire regiment. The transformation in her role was remarkable. She had gone from being the newest and least trusted member of the Queen's Guard to becoming one of its most valuable assets. Her ability to spot threats and think strategically under pressure had earned respect from seasoned veterans. But Sarah knew the real test was still coming. Hartwell's network wouldn't abandon their plans just because one reconnaissance mission had been exposed. They would adapt, find new approaches, and eventually launch their primary. Operation Colonel Harrison had warned her that the next phase would likely involve a coordinated attack during a major royal event when security would be stretched thin and the stakes would be highest. Sarah understood that her vigilance and skills would soon face their ultimate challenge as she stood guard that evening. Watching the palace grounds in the fading light, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed in just a few days. She had come to serve as a ceremonial guard and found herself defending against sophisticated threats to national security. 2 weeks later, during a state dinner for visiting foreign dignitaries, Hartwell's network finally made their real move. The palace was filled with hundreds of guests, staff members, and additional security personnel, creating the perfect cover for infiltration. Sarah was stationed at a secondary entrance when her communication device crackled to life. "All units, we have multiple breaches detected. Unknown personnel have accessed service corridors in sections 4 and 7. Her heart raced as she realized this was the coordinated attack Colonel Harrison had predicted. The preliminary reconnaissance, the failed attempt to discredit palace security, and the surveillance of communication systems had all been building to this moment. "Control, this is Mitchell. I can see suspicious movement near the kitchen service entrance. 3 individuals in catering uniforms, but they're not following standard service protocols. Acknowledged. Do not engage alone. Backup is en route." But Sarah could see the intruders were moving toward the main banquet hall where the Queen and her guests were dining. Every second of delay increased the danger to the royal family and international visitors. Her mind flashed back to her training about decisive action in critical situations. The 3 fake caterers split up, each heading toward different access points to the banquet area. Sarah knew backup wouldn't arrive in time to stop all of them. She had to make a choice: follow orders and wait for help. or act independently to prevent what could be a catastrophic security breach. She chose action. Using her radio, she quietly coordinated with other guards while moving to intercept the closest intruder. "Reynolds, Mitchell here. I'm pursuing the subject heading toward the North Service corridor. Can you cover the main entrance?" "Copy that, Mitchell. Be careful." Sarah moved through the service corridors with practiced stealth, using her knowledge of palace layout gained during months of training. She reached an intersection just as the first intruder was attempting to plant what appeared to be a listening device near the banquet hall. "Palace security, stop and identify yourself." The man spun around, revealing he was carrying more than just surveillance equipment. Sarah saw the outline of weapons beneath his catering jacket as he reached inside his clothing. Without hesitation, she tackled the intruder before he could draw his weapon. They struggled briefly before Sarah managed to subdue him using defensive techniques she had mastered during training. She secured his weapons and equipment while calling for immediate backup. Control, first subject secured. Found weapons and electronic devices. This is definitely the main attack. Meanwhile, Captain Reynolds and other guards were successfully intercepting the remaining intruders throughout the palace. The coordinated response that Colonel Harrison had planned was working perfectly, turning Hartwell's sophisticated attack into a complete failure. Within minutes, palace security had rounded up not just the 3 infiltrators at the state dinner, but also several support personnel who had been waiting outside the grounds. The entire network was being systematically dismantled. Colonel Harrison arrived on scene as Sarah was turning over her prisoner to specialized security teams. His usually stern expression showed clear approval and pride. "Outstanding work, Private Mitchell. Your quick identification and decisive action prevented what intelligence suggests would have been an attempt to take hostages during the state dinner." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and accomplishment. "Sir, the training prepared me for this. I just did what any guard should do." "That's where you're wrong," Harrison replied. "What you did required exceptional judgment, courage, and skill. Most people would have waited for backup or missed the signs entirely. You've proven yourself to be exactly the kind of guard the royal family needs." Captain Reynolds approached, his face beaming with pride for his newest team member. "Mitchell, I owe you an apology. When you first joined the unit, I had serious doubts about whether you belonged here. Today you've shown that you don't just belong, you're one of the finest guards I've ever had the privilege to serve with." The compliment meant more to Sarah than any medal or commendation could. She had earned the respect of her fellow guards through demonstrated competence under the most challenging circumstances possible. In the aftermath of the thwarted attack, investigations revealed the full scope of Hartwell's conspiracy. The network had connections to foreign intelligence services and had been planning to use the state dinner hostage situation to embarrass the monarchy and damage international relationships. Sarah's role in exposing and defeating the plot earned her rapid promotion and assignment to the most elite protective details. She became a case study in military training programs about the importance of vigilance and decisive action in security roles. Years later, as she rose through the ranks to become one of the youngest female officers in palace security, Sarah often reflected on that first day when Captain Reynolds had doubted her capabilities. She had proven that dedication, training, and courage were more important than traditions or expectations. The handcuffs that had briefly restrained her during the false arrest became a symbol of how quickly situations could change when someone was willing to stand up and do the right thing, regardless of consequences. Colonel Harrison had shown her that true leadership meant supporting those who demonstrated competence and integrity under pressure. Sarah's story became an inspiration for other young women seeking to serve in traditionally male-dominated security roles, proving that excellence in protecting others knew no gender boundaries.